Don't worry about there not being a plan. Keep going. Keep doing the things you really enjoy. Keep making opportunities. One of those opportunities is going to come good. It's just a matter of time.
Dr. Alice Bunn. This is STEMazing.
I grew up in north of Scotland, actually, just north of Aberdeen, which you wouldn't know now from my accent. I moved down to Shropshire when I was 8. I went to this teeny tiny little primary school in Scotland, which was absolutely delightful, but it had one class for infants and one class for juniors. And in the infants class, I was the only girl. And I had a big brother as well. So, you know, for my 3rd birthday, I definitely wanted a Tonka truck. And I think I got a Tonka truck too. I think I did. I was a swimmer when I was little. I did lots of swimming. So after I'd moved to England, I was part of the swimming club. Swimming club was my social life. So I spent a lot of time swimming. We lived in the countryside. So, you know, what do you do in the countryside? You make your own fun, don't you? Climb trees, ride bikes, all that kind of stuff. So when I was 7-year-old, my dad died quite suddenly and we were left quite isolated, really, up in Scotland. We'd moved up there for my dad's work. So my mum had family down in Shropshire. So then we moved down to Shropshire. You know, it leaves a tail. It definitely leaves a long tail. And I'm not going to recommend it to anyone. On the other hand, it's funny. Someone once asked me, because I've tended to do, you know, subjects at school and degree in university, all these things that are quite typically more for boys than girls, should we say? And someone said to me once, why did it occur to you that you could do things that men could? And without missing a beat, I just said it never occurred to me I couldn't. And then I was kind of horrified. I was like, gosh, that sounds really, really obnoxious. And it wasn't obnoxious. It was just because I grew up with a single mum. And I was very used to seeing mum mow the lawn, chop the logs, fix the car, all those kind of things. And it was really natural to me to be able to do that as well. So it's not recommended, but I would say one of the enduring legacies is that I had a fantastic role model in my mum, right? I had a fantastic role model as someone that didn't see gender as a barrier, didn't have a choice about it, but didn't see gender as a barrier and got on with all the things that perhaps in other households were left to the domain of the dad. It's such a cliche, it's such a classic, but, you know, for engineers, I just love taking things apart. I love taking things apart and trying to put them back together again. And sometimes I was successful and quite often I wasn't. I had an absolutely terrible, I really can't admit the brand of my motorbike when I was 16. It was just awful. It was a hairdryer on wheels. It really was. But I loved it. I loved it. Because it was freedom, right? Because we lived in the middle of nowhere. So if you wanted to get anywhere, having a motorbike age 16 was fantastic. But of course, it was terrible. So it was always breaking. I was always taking it apart. Family joke was I was always putting it back together again. There was always bits left on the driveway, etc. So when I started to think about what I might do for a career, I would say I was pretty lazy, to be honest. I would say STEM subjects came naturally to me. A-levels, I did maths, physics and chemistry. I really enjoyed them all. So when it came to choosing a degree, I did material science, which is like the combination of maths, physics and chemistry. So still being quite lazy about choices. I had a brilliant year. My second year of uni, I went to Finland and studied a year at Technical University in Tampere, which was brilliant. And they had the most fantastic education system where you could literally dip into all sorts of different subjects, all sorts of different disciplines within a given subject. So it enabled you to really get a feel for what it might be to carry on studying material science or what it might be to carry on studying polymers or ceramics or metals. So sure enough, when I came back to the UK for my third year, I did metallurgy, which was a really well-informed choice, actually, because I'd had that second year of kind of dabbling and trying with different things. I really wanted to stay in research. Didn't really know how that worked. I think I wrote to quite a few universities saying, hello, my name's Alice, I'd like to do a PhD, please. And didn't, to be honest, get very much back. But in my third year, I did go to a conference. I had a third year project supervisor and he was very involved in the organisation of the conference. So let's be honest, I went along as a bit of a lackey, bit of another pair of hands, helping out. It was an interesting thing to do. I didn't understand a lot, but there was one guy, a German speaker, who was just gifted in putting really complicated technical stuff in plain language. And as a result, I found him really, really interesting. So later that evening, when I was, wandering around, 21-year-old, thinking I don't really know anyone here, I started chatting to this guy. And he was really interesting. And he said, actually, I'm just wrapping up my research. I'm just about finishing my PhD. Oh, look, here's my PhD sponsor who came walking around the corner. So I said, hi, I'm Alice. I'm quite interested in research. And the industrial sponsor said, that's interesting. We're looking for someone to continue this research. And then my PhD supervisor walked around the corner and said, you should come and visit us in the lab. And there I was drinking my pint of beer going, yes, that'd be nice. And he carried on. And I thought, blimey, he's actually serious, isn't he? Put down your beer and start taking this seriously. Because, to be honest, it was University of Cambridge. And, when I wrote to all those universities, I didn't write to Oxford and Cambridge because I thought that's beyond my, that's out of my reach. But no, turned out it wasn't. So I went on to do a PhD at Cambridge with said supervisor and with said industrial sponsor. Serendipity. I really loved research. For me, I felt very lucky. I felt like I had a really, really interesting project because whilst there was a lot of, long, dark nights of the soul staring down a transition electron microscope because it wasn't booked at midnight, strangely enough, I felt really, really pleased because I did have an industrial sponsor that really cared about my research. PhDs get very niche. And I think it's quite hard to keep that motivation when you're studying something that is so narrow. What was very motivating was I was working on a product that was 1% efficient. You don't want to be an engineer to work out that's not great. And my task was to try and understand from a kind of, scientific engineering perspective, why it was only 1% efficient. And if I could do that, then hopefully you would increase that efficiency, less raw materials, less digging metals out of the ground, more environmentally sustainable. And that was quite a driver for me as well. Even all those thousands of years ago when I was a student, we were realising that it's really important to take care of the environment. And when you see something where there is such profound waste, in any process, I think it's quite motivating to try and improve that. There was very few women on my course, as you might imagine. So I think there was about 40 of us altogether, and there was about 4 women probably. So sadly, quite a typical stat, I think, for engineering. Bit low, 10%, but we're not that much higher than that across the piece. I think what was interesting for me was of the women that were on that degree course, all of them had applied for that course. None of them had arrived there through clearing or through serendipity. And I think there's something in that, right? When you're doing a subject which is not a natural choice necessarily, you're probably going to have worked quite hard to get there, and you're probably going to be a little bit more determined than your peers, perhaps. Other than that, I'm not going to lie, it didn't really bother me that much being in that kind of male-dominated environment. And I guess maybe you can root that right back to, being the only girl in the infants class in Slains Primary School. And also looking back at the kind of female role models in my life, especially my mum, who, pretty much rolled the sleeves up and did anything at all. There wasn't a strong gender stereotype, I suppose. So it didn't bother me as much as you might expect. As regards role models, interesting, actually. I've never thought about it before, but, that German guy at that conference, when I think about it, that ability to be able to speak plainly, to be able to articulate something that is really quite technical, I find a very, very inspiring attribute. I spent a couple of years working at the Science Museum, and there were some really, really talented people working there. And our rule of thumb was, if you want to communicate something to a general audience, you pitch it at about the level of understanding that an average 7-year-old would be able to take in, which might seem, patronising. I don't mean it to sound patronising in any way, but it's actually a really good rule of thumb. Just, that ability to speak plain English, I think, is highly undervalued. And I think it also enables you to achieve things that might otherwise not be possible. I think the best engineers, the best scientists, the best communicators are people that can really, really break down quite complicated things into simple terms. And also understand who they're talking to, understand the perspective of the person they're talking to. I spent quite a lot of time of my career working in Europe with the European Space Agency, and you've got 22 countries around the table. Everyone's going to have different perspectives. Everyone's going to have different constraints. Some of those are going to be obvious. Some of those are going to be less obvious. We're all trying to work together. It's really important that you communicate in a way that is clear but kind. Doesn't get you anywhere if you're trying to point score or embarrass people when you're trying to work together. And I think, the best communicators manage to do that very well. And as a result, are very successful, because instead of ending up in, a discussion / argument, you're much more likely to find common ground. You're much more likely to be able to find the things that you're able to agree on and take things from there. I saw that so much in my career in space. Countries collaborating who were not typically collaborating on the ground. It was really, really inspiring to me. And that's, again, it's kind of like that's the superpower, isn't it, of science and engineering. The superpower of science and engineering is often transcending those borders or barriers that exist in our other parts of our lives. So one of the really, really fun things I did alongside my PhD at Cambridge, we got some funding from the then Committee of Public Understanding of Science, and we put together this kind of roadshow, this kind of workshop. I don't know whether I should be admitting this, it's against all health and safety principles now, but we would be bouncing around Cambridgeshire in my grand's old beat-up mini metro with like vats of liquid nitrogen in the back, ready to do our materials show. But it was so much fun. It was so much fun being able to excite and inspire and demystify what science is for kids. One of my favourite experiments was we'd get this bucket of just water with a bit of washing up liquid in it, and then we'd pour some of the liquid nitrogen in it. So what happens instantly, that liquid nitrogen, super, super cold, expands, turns into a gas, and you get like an igloo-shaped mound of bubbles. It's so cool and so impressive, but so simple. And, seeing kids just get really, really excited by that, seeing that kind of, science come to life was really, really fun. So I've got 4 kids. They're quite a wide age range. Kids, they'd hate me for that. They're not kids anymore. The eldest is 20. But anyway, so the eldest 3 I had quite close together, and because of that I decided to take quite a big career break, and so I was no work at all for about 5.5 years. And then when I went back to work, I worked part-time, or part-paid as I sometimes refer to it. But it was great. I definitely did quite a few hours, but I was able to work really flexibly. I mean, it's really interesting to reflect now, because this is, over 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And at that time, working part-time was quite unusual. Certainly there wasn't the amount of homeworking that there is today, but there were opportunities there. How did I approach it? Well, there weren't many opportunities. There weren't many jobs that I was interested in part-time. So I would ignore that detail, apply for that full-time job, and then, negotiate my way onto part-time terms and conditions. And that worked pretty well for me, actually. And that was fine. And my husband was working. And then there was a big gap. But in 2017, we adopted 18-month-old little boy. I had another year of work then. And then I went back to working part-time. Working part-time is challenging. On the one hand, I feel absolutely blessed that I was able to do that. I feel really blessed that I had that big chunk of time off completely when the kids were little. And I feel blessed that I was able to do the part-time and be part of their lives, etc. But of course, you're racked with guilt the whole time. You always feel like you should be in, one place when you should be in another place. And don't get me started on nativity plays. It's just disaster. How are you supposed to do that? Ow. Sports days. But anyway, but I think the other thing as well as feeling guilty about maybe not being there where I should have been for the kids, I think at that time, the risk of part-time working is that you wouldn't really be taken seriously. You wouldn't really be considered the decision maker a senior person in the office. And frankly, I was not particularly open and honest about working part-time. If someone asked me directly, I'd tell them, but I had a job where I was travelling quite a lot as well. So if I wasn't in the office, people often made the assumption that I was travelling on business, and I didn't see the need to correct them often. I wouldn't say it goes as far as being a guilty secret, but certainly it wasn't something that you would, wear on your chest. It could be used, I think, in a really negative situation as something that people hold against you. You can't take that seniority. You can't deliver that role because you're only part-time, quote unquote. I like to think the opposite is true. I like to think that actually it was a very, very healthy balance. And it did mean that when I was at work, I was 110% because I had the benefit of having the bit more downtime than most normal people in the workplace. And then, of course, this job came along as CEO of the Institution of Mechanical Engineers. I knew it wasn't going to be a part-time gig. It was not a situation where I could apply and then say, by the way, I'd only like to work 3 days a week. That wouldn't really have worked. But we'd had this terrible experience of the pandemic, which brought with it an incredibly flexible way to work. So suddenly the idea of my husband being based at home and working part-time wasn't crazy. So when I got this job, we flipped it. And I became the main breadwinner and he became the main carer of the children staying at home, which I love in so many ways. My daughter comments on it and she really loves the fact that she has seen mum and dad play, interchangeable roles at home. She's seen dad go out and be the main breadwinner. She's seen, mum go out and, us take completely equal turns on the domestic duties, which I think is incredibly healthy, not only for her, but for the 3 boys, actually, really healthy for them to see that too. I absolutely love engineering. I absolutely love the fact that we do these things that deliver real life benefit to every citizen on the ground. I mean, I spent about 20 years working in the space sector and I really wasn't that typical kid, right? I wasn't that kid that gazed out of her bedroom window in wonderment at the stars and the planets, etc. Nope, not at all. And it took me about 3 brushes with space. It took me the understanding that over 50% of the essential climate variables that we need to measure to even understand what's going on with our changing climate can only be measured from space. I thought, wow, that is really valuable. And, all sorts of other things I could talk about, financial transactions, weather forecasts, navigation, etc. But the fact that we have this capability, I'm talking about space as an example, that it's true of so many different engineering disciplines. You have this kind of invisible thread that is running through our lives that most people just take for granted. People take for granted the bridge doesn't fall down. People take for granted that the trains run. People take for granted the incredible engineering inventions that power live on modern day lives. I just find that really, really inspiring and rewarding to be part of that sector. So I think we all have a duty to be a role model. And that sounds perhaps big-headed, but there aren't enough of us around. And I think if you are a female working in the engineering sector, you need to show up. And we need to make sure that other people who perhaps struggle to envisage their career see someone doing that. And that's true for whatever level you've got to, I think, in your career. I think it's really, really important that we show up and offer a contribution where we can as role models. Don't worry about there not being a plan. I can look at my career looking backwards. You might think there's a plan. And if there is a plan, there's a kind of a golden thread of advocacy and enthusiasm for science and engineering. But, when I was choosing my A-levels, I had no idea what I was going to do. And I think you just have to keep going, keep doing the things you really enjoy, keep making opportunities. I talked about my, the way in which I did my PhD, found my PhD placement. A lot of that was serendipity, but you do make opportunities, right? chatting to people. Networking is a proven boost to any career. It's like statistics, isn't it? If you are looking for opportunities, one of those opportunities is going to come good. It's just a matter of time.
For more information about the guest featured in this episode, head to stamazing.co.uk/podcast. And to join the inspiration and inclusion revolution, just visit stamazing.co.uk. With thanks to Alexandra Knight and our production team at What Goes On Media. This is Stamazing.